Okay, I'm ready. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. Some of you may have been at a session I gave last month on a very different topic about regulatory schemes in AI. Uh, Last time I made a mistake of going a little bit over my allotted time, and I think there weren't quite enough minutes left for questions, but not as many as I wanted. So I'm going to try to err this time in the opposite direction and maybe finish by 2:30. I'm speaking Eastern Eastern Daylight Time. I know some of you are from other places. So, yeah, some more background about myself is on this slide, about me is on this slide. I hold a joint appointment, which means I get to go to twice as many department meetings as other colleagues of mine. One is in the philosophy department and the other is in the computer science college. My typical teaching roster includes courses both for undergraduate students and for graduate, particularly master's level students. Technology and Human Values is a course that I teach every semester, which is a kind of introduction to ethical and social dimensions of emerging technologies, such as mostly things like AI, but also including climate-related technologies and genetic bioengineering-related technologies as well. The course that I teach mostly for master's level students is called Responsible AI, and that's a course that's really focused specifically on different kinds of AI systems, different ways of thinking about the notion of responsibility in the context of designing and using them. I also work with other colleagues in the Computer Science College to help develop ethics modules for their courses. Sometimes I go in and help them teach those modules. Other times we work together to come up with specific assignments that they then teach. I also am coming off of a Mozilla Responsible Computing grant that was a 2-year grant to offer summertime workshops for faculty instructors from colleges all over the country and a couple of places internationally as well, who are building up their own programs in teaching responsible CS, which is defined in a lot of different ways. You can see also work with some groups outside of the academy. And as was mentioned, my current research, or one of my current research projects, is on artificial agents and parasocial relationships. So this topic today is really related to some things that I've been thinking about. So I'm eager to hear from you about some of your questions, but also some of the ways in which you're thinking about using artificial agents. My assumptions about what you know are minimal. So this is not a session where I'm going to teach you how to build a chatbot. Um, I'm not assuming anyone here holds a CS degree. Really, this is going to be a sort of lay of the land when it comes to very basic ideas about what chatbots are, different examples of where they're used, and some things both to look forward to and to watch out for as we're thinking about implementing them in public service or public sector spaces. So these will be the 4 topic areas that I'll touch on: setting the context, talking about uses, looking at implications, both ones that should make us happy and ones that should make us concerned, and then thinking about how you could take away something by way of questions to think about if you're considering implementing some form of chatbot in your office for whatever public you might be serving. So let's start with the context. This will be easy and quick. A chatbot is simply software or some sort of software system that's designed to chat, and more particularly to simulate some sort of conversation with a user. Usually it's a human user. Um, the current paradigm, of course, is generative AI all over the place, but there have been chatbots that predate the existence of generative models. The category of chatbot is really the larger category, and then there are AI-based chatbots that are a subset of that. One example that many of you may be familiar with, a very rudimentary example of a chatbot is Clippy, which was a Microsoft product that would pop up whether you wanted it to or not when you were using Microsoft Word, earlier versions of Microsoft Word. Now, this is a chatbot, again, very rudimentary in the sense that the kinds of conversations, quote unquote, that you can have with it were limited to picking options that were given to you. There wasn't much back and forth. There was no free-form field where you could just type in questions for it to answer. But this does count as a sort of very basic example of a chatbot. There are more sophisticated examples as well that we can think of. I am a Verizon customer. This is not at all an endorsement of that corporation, but it's an illustration of what I sometimes see when I go to their website, where if it takes me too long to look for what I'm looking for, or if I have some question, eventually over in the corner of my screen, this little thing will pop up and says, "Hey, I can help you." And this is a case where There is a little bit more capacity for this system to have open-ended questions. It's not necessarily limited to a specific script of questions that it can address. And when you run up against the limits of what it's able to address, it hands you off to a human, or maybe it's handing you off to a more sophisticated chatbot. I'm never quite sure about that. But you can see there that it starts with a list of sort of pre-formed questions or topics that you might want to address, but then also gives you the option to be more specific. Moving on to other examples, Character AI is a corporation that makes its own conversational chatbots that also have avatars, so they look on the screen like people. You can also create your own on the Character AI site. And then another example is a product that's called Wobot, which is intended specifically for mental health slash therapeutic contexts. Although it was created in the age of generative AI, it doesn't actually rely on generative AI. Rather, the people who make it are a team of people in the mental health field who have, in essence, come up with several sets of conversational scripts. And so what Wobot does is basically apply one of those scripts depending on the kind of question and the kind of topic that you're using or that you're coming to it to discuss. So again, this is just by way of pointing out that when we talk about what a chat is, we could be talking about a lot of different things. We could be saying, here's a very narrow list of options that you have to engage with the system. We could be saying you're doing something that feels more like a conversation that you would have with a person. We could be saying you're having a conversation with something that doesn't just produce text, but also maybe has a voice or maybe has a physical appearance. Different examples of public sector use of chatbots face an embarrassment of riches. So I looked at several dozen actually, but just for the sake of time and also in the knowledge that many of you probably have your own examples, I wanted to just boil it down to a few here. So going from left to right on my screen, I'll start with the Transportation Authority here in Massachusetts. Many public transportation systems around the world have riders of different level of disability. And there's often a challenge that riders who are disabled face with just getting information that they need about, okay, can I actually access this system? Can I get on this bus? Can I get on this tram or this subway? Is there a specific elevator or escalator system that I can use? So, or if I need some sort of alternative transportation altogether, like a shuttle van, how do I go about getting that? This is a tool that was designed by a couple of students here at my university, Northeastern University in Boston, in conjunction with the Transit Authority here to help address that issue. So it's not that the services and systems weren't already in place for disabled riders. It was more that figuring out how to navigate on the MTBA website to find those things or calling someone and then being stuck in phone tree hell was just a hassle for a lot of people, as it is for most of us. And so the chatbot designed to help with this system is designed specifically, as the headline says there, to speed up the process, right? Both to make it easier for people to get the assistance that they need, and to take some of the burden off of MBTA workers who are already overstretched. In the middle is a slide representing or a screenshot of a product called StaffLink. This is for junior staff who are in the US Congress. So every couple of years, there's turnover with people coming into Congress as staff members who are there for the first time, who have all kinds of questions. There's a lot of institutional knowledge and memory in the form of the other people who are still there, but there's also probably 17 different versions of the very same question that somebody in a particular Congress person's office might ask. And so this tool is meant to help them address those questions, right, without bugging the same person over and over again. Moving on is the AC helper, AC standing for affordable connectivity. In this case, the public in question is not new junior staffers, but rather people who have low or little internet access. So this is a federal program, which I know is one of the many that's currently being reviewed. I guess I will say that. But the Affordable Connectivity Program, again, is something that is meant to expand and increase access to the internet for people. And again, many of the people who could most easily benefit from this program and get the most out of it may be unsure of how they can get information that they need to have about that. So this is another tool that's meant to make it more accessible, friendlier, and with less wait time. And then the final example is one called Grantwell. Here again, another Massachusetts-focused tool. But this is meant to help people who are applying for federal grants in Massachusetts communities. And again, it's a conversational bot that sort of talks you through what are the particular what is your grant project, what is your timetable, what is your anticipated budget, in order to help you then craft a grant proposal. And so again, we could come up with other examples ad nauseum, but these are just meant to give a range of answers to the question, what are examples of public service chatbots? And you can see also with these examples that who is considered the public really varies from one case to another. I've talked about this already here and there, but just to have it all in one slide, I wanted to mention several of the potential benefits. The main one perhaps being availability in the sense of most offices have opening and closing hours. People sometimes are out or they need vacation or they need sleep. And people have questions at all times of the day, all days of the week, even on holidays. So it's perhaps great to have a system that's there that can answer maybe some important queries that people might have, no matter what time of day or day of the week. Some of the systems that I know about also acknowledge the fact that not everyone who lives in a municipality necessarily is fluent in the same set of languages. So it could be really important to know if you're in a city where you're not fluent in the language, but there are a lot of, I don't know, important registration details or other public service related details that you would need to have to be able to have a system that can provide that information to you in terms that you can easily understand, so that you're not having to rely on a human translator or on your kid, for example, to be able to get knowledge about important things that benefits, for example, or opportunities. This is related, the third one, to the availability point. All of us, no matter what job we have or what role we have in life, find ourselves maybe asking the same sets of questions again and again, or answering the same sets of questions again and again. And so this offers a way in particularly burdened systems where there's staff who are busy doing other things, or maybe not enough staff to handle all of the workload. Again, to be able to have at least a first pass through some of the more commonly asked questions, so that the ones that are then more serious or that require a little more customization can be funneled on or filtered out and addressed by somebody who then has more time and more expertise to take them on. There's another and large dimension of research in psychology and in human-computer interaction about the fact that for many people, there is greater trust that they place in a system that seems to be conversational. And what I mean by that is simply that if it feels like you're interacting with a person, then for many people, they are inclined to ascribe greater trustworthiness to that system than they would be to just reading some text on a screen. So let's talk now also about some of the potential issues and risks that chatbots bring along with them. I'm going to focus here on four categories of issue. One is the category of reliability-related issues, then scope-related issues, privacy-related ones, and finally, anthropomorphism-related ones. These all overlap, by the way. They're not necessarily clear and distinct, but I'm just trying to indicate different areas of emphasis. So the first one, particularly when it comes to generative model-based chatbots, but not only in that case, has to do with the reliability of the outputs. One thing that gets used as a term a lot in the context of generative models is the term hallucination. I don't actually think that's a helpful term because the models are actually doing what they're supposed to do, right? They are modeling a conversation. They are modeling an answer to a query. The ideas of truth and falsity are not really part of how these models are built in the first place. And so that's an issue, right? If you're using a chatbot that's built on a generative model to try to provide factual information to people who might be seeking it, where there's some sort of high stakes or even medium stakes. In this particular case, and I know many of you are already familiar with it, so I apologize for going over old ground. But this was a case where a man had to fly home suddenly because of a death in the family, and was inquiring on Air Canada's website about the airfare for bereavement flights. And the chatbot that he interacted with on Air Canada's site gave him bad information, bad in the sense of false, which he then relied on, and only to get to the airport, discover that he had to pay a higher price than he had been told by the chatbot. So he applied to get a refund, and Air Canada, the corporation, said, well, we are Air Canada, the corporation. This chatbot that you dealt with, that's a separate entity from us. So we're not going to be responsible for whatever bad information it gave you. Fortunately, the judge didn't really have a sense of humor about that and said, no, no, this is your chatbot. It's on your site. You're certainly representing it as something that is meant to help Air Canada customers. So you can't disclaim responsibility when it gives information that is not correct. So this is again an issue because of the ways in which generative models are, that again, they're sold and marketed often as, oh, these provide facts, but they don't really. They provide basically fact-shaped sentences. And so there's a question to be faced about if you're using them especially to give information to a public that needs information about taxation or power bills or registration or medical help or assistance for any other thing, how do you ensure that what its outputs are conform to what's accurate? Let's talk about scope-related issues. Here I mean that in essence, we want to make sure if you're going to be using a chatbot system in your public sector domain, that it be specific for that domain, not a general purpose system, in other words. So in this case, this is the American Psychological Association reminding people that there's an issue with taking an off-the-shelf, generic LLM, for example, like ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other ones, and treating it, using it in a way that's sort of not suited for its purpose. If it's a general purpose model and your office is providing information about transportation access, then that's a mismatch. So is there a way that you can make sure that the scope of the model or the scope of the chatbot, more accurately, fits actually the scope of what your office does by way of services? Privacy-related issues are legion. We all know this. This long predates chatbots and generative models and other forms of AI. Um, so these are just some example headlines that focus specifically on OpenAI's product, ChatGPT, but are actually not limited to that, whereby it's the outputs and interactions that you have with them may be quote unquote less private than you expect. So in particular, again, when you're thinking about public sector work, or you're dealing with a public that may be interacting about topics that are sensitive to them, right? How do you know that the information that they're interacting with, sorry, that the system that they're interacting with has some way of securing that information, securing those interactions? Do you erase those conversations after they've occurred? Do you store them somewhere? If you do, how do you know that only the right people have access to them? And again, this is a big issue, a looming issue, in fact, partly both because of the material in which these things are trained, but then the further fact that the more people are interacting with them, unless you say otherwise, you are further training those models on that new data. So have you built your chatbot in such a way that it's not doing that? Or if it is doing that, is that clear to the people who are using it? Do they know that? There are a couple of anthropomorphism related issues that I want to talk about briefly as well. Um, Again, remember that not everything is going to look like Clippy, which is a bouncing paperclip that no human has ever looked like. Increasingly, we're seeing chatbots that don't just output text on a screen, but you have voice. They have physical appearance of some kind, right? They look like a person or they look like a particular kind of person. So when you're thinking about using a chatbot or designing a chatbot, um, if it's going to look like a human, then you need to think about which humans exactly it's going to look like and why it's going to look like them, which humans it's going to sound like and why exactly it should sound like them. So any aspect of a human's social identity, in other words, could be implicated in your design choices involving chatbots. Further question, should you constantly be reminding users that they're interacting with an inanimate object, namely the software, the chatbot? Um, If you do that too hard, if you hit that point too hard, you might risk undermining some of the benefits of using the chatbot. Because again, remember the evidence that suggests that for many people, um, they trust chatbots a little bit more than they would trust, not more than they would trust a human, but certainly more than they would trust just text on a screen. So it could be that if you do too good a job of reminding them that they're not interacting with an actual person, that might diminish their sense of, oh, this is a usable tool. On the other hand, if you don't do it enough, you might risk inculcating false beliefs in them about the model having a personality, or the chatbot being their friend. So the idea of dishonest anthropomorphism is meant to capture that concern. That is to say, dishonest anthropomorphism occurs when you intentionally or negligently build some sort of chatbot or robot or related system that where you're either hiding the features it has or misleading the person in some way about what kinds of features it has. So if it can't do a certain thing, then do you want to design it in such a way that makes it clear to users that it can't do that thing? If it can do a certain thing, then do you want to make it clear to the users that, oh, yeah, it does have that capacity, right? So dishonesty would be in this context of giving users misleading impressions of the model's interior states or capacity for consciousness, or even that it cares about the user. This is going to be a question again and again that comes up as we have more lifelike looking chatbots, lifelike in the sense of human-like. So the synthetic humans on the slide there on the right-hand side of the screen. Um, some of them are already here among us, not among us, but at least on screens. So again, the question of do I know what I'm interacting with, and do I know what its capacities are, will be really important again if you're offering to provide services to the public where you want them to trust what you're providing, you want them to trust the information that they're getting. So, what are some implications for adoption and oversight for those of you who are considering using chatbots in your offices? So I've got a bunch of questions for you to think about, and then I will stop and leave ample time for questions. So the first is, who is the public that your chatbot's meant to serve? So for example, is it meant to help train interns or people who are new to Congress? Is it meant to look to serve people who are trying to figure out how to access a public service? Is the public in this case someone who's applying for a grant? So try to think carefully about whom the chatbot is meant to serve and whether you can somehow limit its use or access to that public. This is addressing the scope problem as well, right? That you want to make sure that you design a chatbot that's fit for purpose in the sense that it meets the context, the contextual needs of your context, and is not meant to be an all things to all people sort of chatbot. Do you even need to use a generative model-based system for your chatbot? Going back to Clippy, but not necessarily going all the way that far back, we can think about ways in which non-generative systems might be preferable. I mentioned Wobot several minutes ago as a very modern day system, very contemporary system that doesn't rely on generative models for its underlying technology, but rather relies on mostly a combination of written scripts and other forms of sort of rule-based software to navigate the conversations that it has with people. And so that might address some of the issues that can come up that are put under the heading of hallucination, if you want to use that word, right? So it might address some of the issues that come along with generative models more broadly. If you are going to use a machine learning based system, is there some way that you can make sure that you know the provenance of its training materials, especially if you're dealing with things involving public services? How will you protect that information? Both the information that was used to train the model, but then also the information that it might be acquiring as a result of its further interactions with users. Is there some way you can test this rigorously before it's unleashed on the larger public? Some more questions to think about, and then I will conclude here. Um, does your chatbot have to look and sound human? Could it look like a cartoon animal? Could it look like some other thing, like a bouncing paperclip or something else? Right? If you want it to look like something and not just be text on a screen, or if you want it to sound like something, like a person, think very carefully about which users you're going to be serving or expect to be serving, which sort of humans you want it to look and sound like. And maybe that should differ depending on who's interacting with it. But again, this is a set of questions that you would want to think very carefully about, discuss very carefully, and be certain that you understand the choices that you've made. An important question is, how will you train your users? And I'm using that phrase explicitly and deliberately. How will you train your users to be able to trust your chatbot? So some of you may have interacted with various large language models. When you go to their web page, you can see the input field, and then down at the bottom in fairly small kind of anodyne text, there will be something like, be careful when using this model, right? And that phrase is really generic and unhelpful, right? It's meant to say all kinds of things from you don't know what data I was trained on to you don't know to what degree you can rely on my outputs are. So what I think is important in the context of public service, public sector chatbots is, again, making clear to the user what sort of tool they're actually interacting with and what its limitations are, which is not to say don't trust my outputs or that this tool is not helpful, but just to say, here is the extent to which it is a helpful tool. Don't try to go beyond that. If you need additional help or you need additional information, here is a person to ask. And so that goes to question number 7, right? Do you already have some sort of clear process whereby that could occur so that the chatbot gets to a point where, or the human gets to a point in the chat with the chatbot interaction that it now makes more sense for them to talk to a person on the phone or by email or in some other way. Finally, ending with the reliability questions and the responsibility and accountability questions. Who's responsible for verifying the responses of these chatbots? You don't want to end up in an Air Canada situation or a similar kind of situation where someone is disclaiming responsibility for erroneous information or misleading information. I'm going to stop there. I will thank you for your time and attendance and turn things over to you all. As I said before, I know that many of you are already using chatbots in your offices, in your workplaces. So I think it would be really helpful for me to hear what you took into consideration when you were adopting them, what sort of design principles have guided your use of them, and what you would want the rest of us to learn from your experience.